Hey folks, welcome to the Otherppl podcast, a weekly show featuring in-depth interviews with today's leading writers. I'm Brad Listi here in Los Angeles. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Hope you're doing okay. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Bluesky. My guest today is Teddy Wayne, author of a new novel called The Winner.
And that's really where the title comes from. And also the girl he starts dating later says, you look like a winner, the kind of guy who gets everything he wants in life. And Connor, of course, does not think that's the case. He thinks he's had to work very hard for everything he's ever gotten, but he looks the part at least. And I think the book is about his embodying more and more that idea of being a winner or the winner. But then again, is he? According to his mentor, you don't want to be that top rank, and that's what he starts reaching for by the end. And it's my belief again. I side with the mentor here. I don't think that's a good perch to be in, a good rank to be in. I think you just get obsessed with power and hang on to it, or whatever that ranking gives you, and people are happier, much happier, when they are okay with sort of having less. But that's a hard thing. Easier said than done, obviously.
All right, that was Teddy Wayne. His new novel is called The Winner, available from Harper. The Winner is a riveting book about money and power and desire. It is set against the backdrop of the pandemic in a fictional gated community called Cutter's Neck, not far from Cape Cod. The Winner tells the story of a young man named Connor O'Toole, who is a working class kid from Yonkers, who, fresh out of law school, has taken a summer job teaching tennis lessons to the residents of Cutter's Neck. These are people who count themselves among the wealthiest in America. And it's kind of a fish out of water story of class and bad decisions. I won't spoil it. It's an absolute page-turner and a perfect summer read. The Winner is a dark and provocative thriller, both shocking and psychologically astute. Always fun talking with Teddy Wayne. He is returning to this show for, I believe, the third time. You will hear us in conversation in just a couple of minutes. A reminder before we get going about my weekly email newsletter. You can sign up over at bradlisti.substack.com. I would love it if you did. And if you listen to this show regularly, if you get something from it, if you appreciate the work that I do, I hope you will join the Otherppl Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep this show going into the future. Today's episode is brought to you by Knopf, publisher of We Were the Universe, the outstanding debut novel by Kimberly King Parsons. It is the official June pick of my book club. We Were the Universe is ambitious, inventive, fearless exploration of sisterhood, grief, motherhood, friendship, marriage, psychedelics, and the many strange, transcendent shapes that love can take. Once again, it's called We Were the Universe by Kimberly King Parsons, available from Knopf. I should add that I just spoke with Kimberly King Parsons on this show in episode 926. We had a great talk. Listen to that one when you get a chance. All right, so my guest once again is Teddy Wayne. His new novel is called The Winner, available from Harper. Teddy Wayne's other books include the novels The Great Man Theory, Apartment, Loner, The Love Song of Johnny Valentine, and Capitoil. Teddy Wayne is the winner of a Whiting Writers Award and an NEA Creative Writing Fellowship. He has taught at Columbia University and Washington University in St. Louis, and he has developed films and television series from his novels with Columbia Pictures, HBO, MGM Television, and other outlets. He lives in Brooklyn, and I am very pleased to have him back here on this show to talk with me about his excellent new novel. So let's get to it. Here I am with Teddy Wayne, and his new novel, one more time, is called The Winner.
It's entirely geographically based on a place I know in Massachusetts. I won't give the name of it, but it's completely identical to that by geography, pretty much identical by demography too. I did distort it and made it a much waspier, more kind of country club classic place than the real life version.
And
Uh,
we're talking about what is it, a town, a place called
it's
Cutter's Neck
a gated community, peninsula, a little 2 mile peninsula next to a town
in
um,
Massachusetts,
in Massachusetts, southern Massachusetts, near Cape Cod, like an hour from Cape Cod.
but fictional.
Well, in the book it's fictional. In real life it's non-fictional, but it's based on a place I know that I've been going to periodically, and always thought it would make for a good backdrop for something, for some sort of novel. It felt like this glamorous setting. The old money values have been interesting to me as a relative outsider to that waspy world. I had really not encountered it that much before this. I never knew what that novel would entail. It wasn't until the pandemic, where I was there briefly, that I thought this would be a good pandemic setting, because people there were able to live relatively normally, in that they lived in this kind of insulated bubble of privilege by being so removed from things, living in an actual gated community, by being so wealthy and being able to afford to hire other people to do their things for them that they needed, to buy shop for them and so on. They could live lives of relative normalcy still, even in the height of the pandemic. And it felt like this place, plus what we saw in America, revealed, if it wasn't obvious already, the deep stratification of lives in America, of economic lives in America, that the haves and have-nots fared very differently during the worst of the pandemic. The haves got to go to summer houses, and the have-nots had to go work in warehouses, and possibly die. So I wanted to set it in this place, and then an idea for what this story might be beyond just being set in the pandemic came to me as well. And I felt like it had to be the classic working class outsider comes to this place. And in the book, to briefly summarize it, Connor O'Toole is a 25-year-old law school graduate who's unemployed, whose mother has diabetes in Yonkers, who's buried in student debt, who gets a job as a tennis pro, a sport he picked up as a kid, somewhat by happenstance, and begins giving lessons to residents of this community, including an older divorcee who starts paying him for off the court lessons in the bedroom. And then he starts dating a younger girl his own age. Complications ensue. So it becomes this sort of tricky, uh, Ripley-esque, match point-esque narrative.
The
And
Graduate comes to mind to me.
yes, The Graduate, but shockingly, and this just reveals how stupid the author can be about his own work, I didn't think of The Graduate until I was halfway through writing it. And I was writing a very Mrs. Robinson-esque figure. I think she's different still, but she's close to her. And it didn't occur to me literally till halfway through that I was like, there's not many other young men, older women stories. I kept thinking of Harold and Maude, which is so far beyond this. And it amazingly took me like, a while to think about The Graduate.
That doesn't surprise me necessarily. I could easily do the same thing. And so just so that I'm hearing you clearly, it started with place for you creatively. You had this, you had this place that you were familiar with on the coast of Massachusetts that was kind of this like wealthy enclave.
Mm-hmm.
And then you, with the pandemic, realized that you had a way in narratively. And then you brought in this outsider, this kind of working class kid who's good at tennis, who shows up for the summer to teach lessons. Like those were the pieces.
Those are the pieces. I think also a desire to write a book similar to The Talented Mr. Ripley, which I first read, saw the movie years and years ago. I first read it at this point about a decade ago and was blown away by it. And I don't think it gives too much away to say that I've always been drawn to stories, novels, films, TV shows where the main character accidentally or semi-accidentally murders someone and has to cover it up the rest of the way. I'm much more interested in that than I am in a detective or a cop is investigating murder and has to figure out who did it. That doesn't really appeal to me as much. It occasionally does, but I'm much more drawn to what if this is not totally planned and there are various factors influencing the homicide, and how do they then cover it up? What do they do? What steps do they take on a sort of procedural level to cover up what they've done? And what kind of guilt is playing at them, is working against them to make them start going potentially, a little crazy as they do so.
Okay, so I guess now is as good a time as any to just flag for listeners that there are going to be, at least to some extent, some spoilers in this conversation. And it's the kind of novel that I feel like I would love for people to just experience it because these twists are great, but it's kind of impossible to have a substantive conversation about the book without getting into the weeds a little bit on some of
Hmm.
these creative choices. And I think before I get into the weeds in the manner that I just sort of described, I want to talk to you about plotting. And I think I did this with you the last time we spoke.
Hmm.
You're so fucking good at plotting a novel. This is a page turner, but it's a literary page turner. And it gets into, as we've been discussing, a lot of the ways in which we live now as human beings, a lot of the bigger picture issues that we either need to confront or are struggling to confront, issues of class around the pandemic, for example, the stratification of wealth, contemporary masculinity, which is often noted about your work as a big theme for you. And yet you are writing, I guess, what could be fairly called a thriller. It's paced beautifully. You're sort of threading this needle that I would love to be able to thread. I think a lot of writers would love to be able to thread it. And I think maybe the more salient point is that as a reader, I am so grateful when an author can thread this needle because too many books don't have enough impetus for me to keep turning the pages, right? There's not enough juice to it. It's so fun. It's so pleasurable to read a novel that has all of these different things happening. And I think if any one of these things is not happening well enough or fully enough, it can diminish the read. But you have found a way to sort of do all of the above. How?
Thank you genuinely for that. And it's funny when you're saying plotting, I was thinking the word plodding, Plodding, and I do think some readers who I think are used to straight up thrillers, like airport rack thrillers, find this too slow. I feel like they maybe are used to a murder happens on the first page and the investigation starts on page two, and they need that kind of rapid fire build up. I was always thinking about this as the first half of this novel will be character dynamics, a love triangle, the tensions involved therein, and then second half will be this, without giving away again too much, this kind of more tense, taut paced thrillerish hurdle to the end of the book. I'm
Yeah,
also,
I just want to interrupt. I mean, like
yeah,
structurally speaking, what you're describing is almost like two different books,
yeah,
and then there's this pivot in the middle, which, like, as you've been mentioning, there are books and movies and stories in the popular culture that we can point to that are structured similarly. Like this seems to be like a framework that one can use, right? Where you have like the lead up, this big rupture in the middle or this big moment in the middle, and then the aftermath, which is a
it,
different kind of story.
it's the midpoint reversal. I always find that is, to me, that's the best place for this sort of twist, is the midpoint. I think thriller readers who want straight thrillers like that to come about a third of the way through, so that short build up, and then the rest of it is the aftermath of this big seismic shift. I found if I did that, there wouldn't have been enough material, there wouldn't have been enough thematic, content to work with, because by the second half, this is very much a relentless rush to the end, and it's more procedural, and it's more about plot and action. And I always felt if you don't have enough of the first half of, or what I wanted to have be a first half, who would care about that second half? You need to have enough character dynamics here to justify and argue for this kind of relentless plot. But you're saying something about being grateful to reading books like this, and I felt the same way I felt the same way in recent years, especially during the pandemic when I was reading books. It was such a nightmare world. You couldn't go anywhere. I was so grateful to any author who could write anything that would just take me out of where I was, whether it was just beautiful, lush prose or whatever it was. But I found myself being more and more drawn to books that had perfectly fast pacing, where I was just gripped in the way that, like everyone else, in the last 10, 15 years, I've been drawn more and more to TV lately. And I feel guilty when I opt for TV over a novel. It's, not even my chosen field necessarily. So when a book can narratively grip me the way that a binge-worthy TV show can, I usually like it much more than I actually like the TV show. I think I prefer being in the world of a novel when it's done well. But I want to write something like that. This is not a book that will be in service to anyone on a deep emotional level. This is not a book that for the someone out there who needs to this book about a class warfare in a summer community. It's not that kind of book. But if it can do anything for someone, it's a book that when you feel like you need an escapist rush that I hope has substance too. That's what I was going for, a page turner with some substance. And again, I think it's being categorized by my publisher as a literary thriller, which is this kind of cursed genre because they're usually not literary enough nor thrilling enough, and or you please one camp too much, you won't please the other camp, and vice versa. So it's a tough needle to thread, as you put it. If you go too heavy on character and theme and prose, the thriller readers find it lacking. If you go too fast paced, the literary readers feel it's insubstantial. Um, so either you've written a book that appeals potentially to everyone, or I think more likely is the case that appeals to absolutely no one.
Well, I don't think that's going to be the case for this book. I mean, it certainly appealed to me. And I'm curious from a craft perspective, if you outline, if there are demands placed upon you as a writer working in this vein that might differ from previous books or that you might have experimented with, if you might have experimented with different approaches to making sure that the pacing was right and that the balance between things like character and pacing and, uh, the more literary parts of it versus the more thrillerish parts of it. Like, did you have to map it out or did you just feel your way through in an intuitive way?
I had to map it out. I map out everything I've written, even the ones that are less plotty than this. But this one I certainly had to. That said, the first draft, I wrote it very quickly. I wrote the first draft in about 6 weeks, which is a record for me. But it was much shorter than the current, than the final manuscript. After that, though, even that was outlined. I still had to go through it many more times, obviously, as anyone would, but had to pad out the plot twists more. It felt a little bit thin. That included talking a lot to an assistant DA I know and a New York police detective I know who gave me tremendous, not just feedback, but ideas for what Connor might be doing, what police might be doing in it, how the law works, and adding elements like that, which I've not really done in the past, adding real world concrete elements of criminology and the law really requires outlining and thinking ahead. I don't think you could just feel your way through what a police investigation might look like or anything like that. So yes, it required a lot of that, of going back over it again, rethinking that kind of outline. Um, and I don't think this kind of book is possible to write without doing so. I think I sort of respect crime writers in that regard because I feel like this is really a puzzle you're building piece by piece. And I'm impressed with, I mean, yes, we revere in our culture, and you and I probably revere as well, the Nobel Prize winning authors who unlock the mysteries of the human condition. And I agree with that. But I'm also impressed by like the hack mystery writer who can come up with a very Byzantine structure and it all makes sense somehow. And they've maybe thought of the ending, that they've reverse engineered it, to the nth degree, and somehow it all works out. That's very hard to do. I'm not sure I could do that. I don't think I could. This is probably the closest I can do to that, which is a intricately plotted novel that still has a lot of middle space of just the standard character scenes and dialogue and so on that I'm more used to writing. Because I don't know if I could do that straightforward seeming hack work of the potboiler mystery.
Yeah, I mean it's its own beast, right? These really intricately plotted like mystery novels or thrillers or whatever, like that's its own skill set. And I'm curious when it comes to the outlining part of it, like what your outline looks like when you get started on a book, and if you like, I don't know, could describe it and then maybe just talk about ways in which you might deviate from the outline. Like everyone I've ever talked to who does outlining for their work always makes a point to say that when they get into the thick of it, they usually veer away. Is that the case for you?
What I've always done, I don't use like index cards. I don't use any special program. I once tried using, is it called Scrivener? Is that program? I tried using it, found it way too complicated. There's like 1,000 files. I don't. All I want was one file. I use Microsoft Word or actually Open Office, a normal document, and I just kind of do bullet points separated. I think I probably described this previously with you. I use a kind of screenplay structure and think about novels that way of a three acts, a midpoint, maybe middle of an act, what would be called a pinch point in classic screenwriting structure, something that reinforces where we're going. And those bullet points they start off sparsely. There's only maybe six of them or three, the big three ideas for what act one, two, and three look like. Then I start filling in the gaps and filling in the gaps between the gaps and more and more. But because they're all just bullet points or brief descriptions of what a scene might look like or what might be the next narrative move, I give myself freedom when I'm actually writing to veer away a little bit. I think I still want to have like the checkpoints that I hit, um, but perhaps at times there's like a new idea you have, and you start looking at, all right, what would the rest of this look like now if I you know impromptu came up with this thing in dialogue. This seems like this might be important. How would that affect something I've written previously too? And then you have to go back and change that. And you get that many times throughout this. Catherine, the older woman Connor tutors in tennis and in the bedroom, or he's really tutored by her, didn't really have a backstory in the first draft, I think, at all. I added that somewhere along the line. And
Her
of course,
backstory.
yeah, there's something that comes out with her, I don't know, about 2/5 of the way through, or say. Once you add that, I had to change many other scenes. The ripple effect is huge, both for her and for another character in it. And so that's perhaps I came up with that sort of in the moment while writing it, while revising. Perhaps I just thought of it when I was doing notes and thought I need something else driving her here. Um, but that's where the outline can kind of fail you, because if you adhere, I find, too strictly to it, you won't invent something new. You'll just stick to what you thought of in that kind of abstract form of an outline, which is clearly not where great literature comes from. That's where great plotting comes from, but not the real stuff of literature.
Well, the thing that you're alluding to, which I will not spoil, but it's something in Catherine's character and in her life that adds a real dimension to our understanding of her, was, I thought, one of the most notable character twists in the whole book. Like, I loved it. I was like, oh, because that's the kind of choice that I think you make in this book that maybe a more traditional thriller writer would not make. Like, that's a distinguishing factor, or one of the distinguishing characteristics of a novel like this, that's sort of playing both sides and threading that needle, because it adds a real measure of depth to her, and it makes the reader empathize or sympathize, and it makes her character round, like very round and interesting. And so when you are working in this way, and as you say, kind of using screenplay structure, which is detectable to me because I've, dabbled in screenwriting myself and have read a lot of these books. I think that screenwriting as a more formal structure, right? The 3-act structure, the 105 pages, whatever it is, it's defined in ways that like a novel is not necessarily defined. But I think that that structure and the discipline imposed upon a writer by it can be super useful. And then there's also, I think, things that screenwriting can teach, say, a literary writer about how to please a reader, which can sometimes get lost in the shuffle, right? We're so busy worrying about pleasing ourselves that we can sometimes forget that we're trying to communicate. And there's a reason why these beats and these structural devices that we, even if we don't know them explicitly, can intuit as lifelong TV watchers and film goers.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why they're there. It's because they work and they're satisfying when you execute properly. I'm curious, as I think, like as a creative matter, of course, but also as a business matter, as somebody who is having success publishing books and who is also adapting his work and selling his work to Hollywood and making a living in a kind of amalgamated way. If like, are these strategic thoughts that you've had? Well, you know what? Like the only way to make this all go is if I'm working in these different ways. And you like to screenwrite, right? It's also
Yeah.
interesting to you. So it would serve you well if you're going to write novels that somebody in Hollywood could read and easily imagine on the screen.
It would. And I began writing this novel simply because I wanted to write it and I was excited to write it. It wasn't begun in a cynical attempt to say this is going to be adaptable and Hollywood will be into this. That said, once I started it, I became conscious this is probably going to appeal to film people or TV people, based on the kind of story it is, the subject matter. Sex, money, and violence always gets TV and film people going, and the kind of narrative propulsion it had. I was aware of that. It didn't stop me, certainly, and I wasn't writing, and I knew I was not writing a book of haikus that were unadaptable. I was conscious of this, but it wasn't cynical attempt to say, let me write something that I know can sell. That said, there's a meta theme in this book that I think no one but me would even think to look for, which is Connor's Connor's moral turpitude over the course of the novel. Primarily is meant to reflect, in my view, American cultures and American politics turpitude over the last now 8 years, let's say, just coincidentally 8 years, um, and and that his increasing corruptibility and venality, is he's taking his cues from our leaders, and that's where he is. An uncharitable critic could very easily argue that my own decision to write this is part of that, or the kind of books I've been maybe writing more. My own career path has been down this path of corruptibility too, of going toward this is the most mainstream book I've ever written, I think. Um, Certainly the one that has the most potential for a film or TV adaptation. And I thought about my own kind of being my own susceptibility to being pulled by those corrupting forces too. And if I think back on my career evolution too, and just calling it a career already sort of makes it impure. You want to think of it as an art, but it is a career too. It's how I make my living. When I began writing fiction in earnest about just about 20 years ago, I was just writing fiction. I didn't have an agent. I was just wanted to write. I now have, and this is, I don't say this to brag, I say this to point out to listeners how business minded I sort of things have become for me, and that in a way that's hard to avoid. I have a literary agent, obviously. I have a film agent. I have two film managers. I have an entertainment lawyer. And this book isn't even copyrighted in my name. It's copyrighted to my loan out S Corp because of a complicated tax matter involving having sold the film rights first or something. I don't know. There's a lot of emails about it and fully understand it, but it's not even under my own name anymore. I'm kind of running a business. I'm very literally running a business in a way I never would have thought about 20 years ago even not 10 years ago, really.
And
And
is this at the behest of your entertainment lawyer? Like your entertainment lawyer is advising you to do this, or is this something you came up with on your own?
the S corp thing,
Yeah.
the S corp I've had for, I don't know, 7 years at this point. You do it at a certain point when it makes some. I was at the behest of my accountant, but the copyright thing was a weird issue, and I don't want to get into the weeds of this unless you want to turn this into a entertainment law podcast. It was something about film studios. Maybe it's different for TV. Film studios, and cut this if it's deadly boring, please. Film studios won't like option it, pay you or something. They only pay the person it's copyrighted to, unless, I don't know. It's complicated. I didn't understand it. It would have meant some difference of taxation, and I hope the IRS is not. Do you have any IRS listeners for this
Tons.
podcast? Yeah,
Tons.
it's huge. It's huge in Virginia. Um, I can't remember all the details, but it was a tax thing, and it ultimately had to go under my S corp name, which has an embarrassing name, by the way. I came up with it in the accountant's office off the bat, off the cuff, 7 years ago. He asked me, "What do you want to call this?" And I just said something quickly, not knowing it would follow me everywhere, and eventually be on the copyright page of this book.
Which is what? I don't even.
It's called Chico and Chico Incorporated. It's not a cool name. And then I looked at Cormac McCarthy. I looked at one of his books recently. I saw the copyright is like, it's not his name either. It's like CM, obviously his initials, like XVIIX, like some cool sci-fi kind of thing. I was like, oh fuck, I should have done that. I should have gone the Cormac McCarthy route instead of
Well,
Chico and Chico Incorporated.
word to the wise for those of you listening who might open an S corp someday. And you mentioned briefly earlier that this book sold film rights before it was published, or even maybe had a publisher.
Yeah.
So how did that happen? That's your film managers taking the manuscript out and hustling it around?
Yeah. I got these manager. I had a film agent for a while. I think most novelists get some kind of a film agent through a books to film agent through their own agent, typically. And because I've had this interest in screenwriting and have been doing it for a while, I've been with them for a while. I got these two managers because I was trying to get a more serious, separate screenwriting career going too. And in fall of 2020, they took it out and circulated around town, and it got some attention, and things developed from there. And I was still revising the manuscript itself as a novel, which is the weird part about it, that we felt like it was ready to show to film people or TV people, because they're mostly looking for story, and they know it'll be changed eventually anyway. But I wanted to work on it more as the novel itself.
But the manuscript and the form that it was in was enough to generate real excitement. I want to say there was a bidding war over this book.
There was, yeah.
And so the rights sell, you get to do the adaptation, because not all writers do, but you like to do that stuff. So
Hmm.
you're adapting it. And like, can you say where we are in the process? I always feel like it's cryptic. You're not allowed to talk or whatever. But
Yeah,
let me ask you this first: feature film or TV, or do you not know?
feature film for
Feature
sure.
film,
Yeah.
and there's a script done.
I finished the script. My work is done. It's in the hands of the producers. Uh, at this point, I'm sort of out of. I'm not a producer myself on it, so I'm kind of out of the loop. They do whatever they do with it behind closed doors. I'm not sure, but my work is, at least for now, done.
Okay. And do you feel I mean, I know these things they're notoriously fickle and they come apart. And, this is just the story I've heard over and
Hmm.
over again. But with a book like this, where there's like a bidding war and there's a lot of excitement around a project, that usually gives it a little bit of a better chance. Are there stars attached? Like, do you have like director attached and all that stuff? Or are they in the process of packaging?
They There was this actor attached from the start, and again, I hate talking about these things because I feel like you just sound like an asshole when you talk about getting a bidding war going and so on. Just seem like the creme de la creme of douches who got this sort of thing. But if it helps your audience, or if you're curious, um, different production companies had came to us with different actors attached to it. I don't really know how these actors actually read it so fast. I just don't believe they all did. I wonder if
I
they
was
just
going to
sort of.
say,
I wonder if their agents said, "Look, this is good. You should do this," and they signed on without having read it. So we had a few different production companies, but I think in the end there were three young actors attached from different companies.
To play Connor,
Yeah,
the
and we
tennis
went with one.
player.
I can't say who it is, but we went with one of them, and that made it more appealing because it's movie stars and directors who get things made in Hollywood, in terms of get finance people who are backing it financially to sign on.
Okay, so I just read, maybe it was in the press materials that were enclosed with the book, the film rights had sold or whatever. But when I was reading it, I couldn't help but try to imagine how it would be adapted. And since you did the adaptation, I'm just curious, like what any adaptation from book to film requires a willingness to change the
Yeah,
source material. And I know from prepping for this conversation that you're not precious about that. You couldn't be if you're doing screenwriting for your own work. It's just the nature of it. Film is a different beast. And are there things that you can point to that you had to change or tweak in the screenwriting process versus the book?
absolutely. Not any narrative shifts. The story is essentially the same. The big change was in the book. He's, as I said, sleeping with this older woman. He's also sleeping with this girl his own age. Starts sleeping with her later on, having a real relationship with her. In the book, he's into both of them in their own ways differently. He's sexually obsessed with the older woman, and he's falling in love with the younger girl. But not it's not a very sexually fruitful relationship, and there's no emotional warmth with the older woman. He's getting one thing from each of them and not the other thing. Um, Obviously, a lot of readers are not going to like this that much, but I think literary readers tend to be more open or flexible about the immorality of their protagonists. We can sort of get inside their head. We can, still be interested even if we're judgmental. For film, that's much harder road to hoe. Someone might be deemed much more unlikable if they're doing that. So I had that in the first draft, and the producers felt like I should make him less sexually intrigued by the older woman, at least once he starts dating the younger girl, and had to make it something he wants to get out of, but it was forced into doing, which he somewhat is in the book too, by financial necessity, but keep it just that, not that he's also addicted to her as he is in the novel. So that changed, and that does change things quite a bit, in terms of the mood of the movie. That he's not a guy who's seeing if he can get away with everything. He's more of a guy we could maybe understand ourselves in the same position as, that he's doing this thing he doesn't like to do, but he has to do it. So that was the big change, and I think quite a meaningful one. And they're probably right. I think it makes sense that if you're making a big, hopefully studio movie, that you're trying to reach the masses, you don't want to alienate everyone in the first 30 minutes by showing a guy who's sleeping with two women and enjoying both of them.
Right. Yeah. No, ideally, you don't alienate everybody within 5 minutes, but uh, that's exciting. I think a lot of people listening who write will be inspired to hear that you've.
Well, they should know though, even in a situation like this that started off well, and the screenwriting process was pretty enjoyable. I still, if I were a betting man on this, I don't know if I'd bet that'll happen. It really, you just never know. And
You can't ever bet unless unless like who? Who are the stars that can actually get a movie like just slam dunk made? There's not that many of them, right?
there's very few. I think the guy they got is one of them, but then you also need a director who can get it made on top of that. I think if those two ingredients in place would be enough, but then that's hard because then that director who's huge gets offered three scripts a day probably and doesn't want to read most of them, and so you're left with. I mean, I think this is why most big movies are bad. They're all kind of obviously turned to like blockbuster movies at this point, and the sort of Alexander Paynes are a dying breed of these mid budget actually good movies that are not just action, sci-fi, horror, etc., that have something to say about humanity. That kind of movie has just kind of disappeared the last 20 years. And then when it does get made, something like The Holdovers by Alexander Payne, it's still a sort of small movie that most America just doesn't see. It wins some awards, but it's not on the level of Barbie, obviously. Um, and so this is a movie that's maybe, has this thriller component to it, so that helps it. But it's also definitely not, I don't know what movies are out these days, but it's not something that immediately has a built-in fan base because it's part of an obvious franchise. And therefore, you've got to get a good director who's maybe very, very choosy instead of just doesn't matter who's directing. So it almost, while it of course matters that Greta Gerwig directed Barbie and did so well, um, if it had been a no-name person, it still would have been fine because as long as the movie was okay, because Barbie sells it, and that's all you need to say. There's a Barbie movie, and it's pretty good. You should see it. The winner, you need like someone huge so that people think, all right, XYZ directed this. I'll go see it, and this guy's in it too. I'll go see it. No one's seeing it because Teddy Wayne adapted his own novel.
Except
That's
me.
that.
I'm
Yeah,
saying
thank you.
Well, I want to shift gears and I want to talk with you about tennis.
Mhm.
Because what occurred to me, there's a brilliant, tennis becomes this kind of brilliant metaphor, or this way into understanding at a level of depth. Connor O'Toole, you're the protagonist, and I'm, for example, Connor considers himself or is considered by other tennis players in his competitive echelon to be what's called a pusher. Why don't you describe what a pusher is for people who aren't tennis players?
It is a defensive specialist who doesn't make mistakes, who doesn't win points by hitting offensive, aggressive shots that are unreturnable, but by just simply hitting the ball back down the middle every time, being consistent and waiting for your opponent to make a mistake or get frustrated. It's a sort of undignified way of winning. No one respects a pusher, really. I played tennis myself. I played now, periodically. If I played in high school, I wasn't even a pusher. I was almost like the next more undignified thing, which is like a junk baller, just someone who hits like weird slices and spins and trick shots, and is kind of like annoying to play against because it feels like there's something deceptive about their playing style. Um, but Connor's pusherness very much parallels his work ethic and his belief in what gets you ahead in America. That as long as I work incredibly hard and don't make any mistakes and am consistently showing up every day to work and study and go to sleep at the right time and so on, I'll get ahead in America and I'll win. I'll win points. I won't win hugely. No pushers ever win. Like, they're never the dominant players of their time. There's someone like Michael Chang who might win like a French Open here and there, but they can get by. And it's part of the ethos that's been handed down to him by his mentor in flashbacks, the guy who taught him tennis when he was young, a retired lawyer, who tells him, you don't want to be the top rank in America or in life. You want to be the top rank is always afraid of losing their perch at the top, meaning people with money, with power, and so on. They're constantly afraid of being knocked off that perch, and therefore they can't actually enjoy it. You want to be the ranks below just below them. You want to be comfortable and content with being ranked whatever number 5 in the world, rather than being obsessive about preserving your number one ranking. And Connor has always believed that, and therefore being a pusher, in his view, can enable that. I think his summer at Cutter's Neck, where he sees how the 1% of the 1% actually lives, teaches him these people all have inherited wealth. They didn't work hard to get here. They all just inherited it. They were born into this. No matter how hard I work, I'll never reach this level. And maybe what I've been doing all along is a mug's game, that this is not, it'll get me ahead, but won't get me to this. And there's that corruptibility again, that he was okay being where he was before, having not tasted this good life, so to speak. But once he gets a taste of it here, it's poisoning him. He now needs it in a way he didn't need it before, and being a pusher is no longer a viable path forward.
Yeah, these things, the thing about your book, like the pacing is great, it's structured beautifully, the characters are rich and round, but it just feels like all these pieces fit together so well. And, you have this working class hero who comes into this rarefied enclave of Cutter's Neck, and yet he's a tennis pro, basically, which is a sport of the elites, right? I mean, tennis is, I think of it that way. It's people in their tennis whites.
Absolutely, yeah.
And, so he's kind of this guy who's crossing over anyway, athletically. And then you have this strategy, this pusher identity that he has as a player. And then you think about the stuff that he gets involved with over the course of the novel and the ways in which tennis informs his choices and the ways in which you sort of infuse his psychology and his point of view on this place and the events that are unfolding. It just fits together really well. And I'm curious to know, like, it feels to me when I read something like that, that it's I can feel the discovery on the page almost. I can feel the discovery in the writing, but maybe that's not the case. Maybe this was something that you preconceived. Maybe you foresaw this when you were building the story and building this character. You saw how tennis could be this kind of lens. Is like, what was the truth?
I'd say both. I can't think back to, did I have like the thought of he's a pusher and so on. I thought of him as calculating and strategic, and therefore I thought, all right, what tennis player would that be? I don't want to make him a guy with a huge serve and forehand. That doesn't make that is both boring. It's just he wins by because he's powerful and talented. Let's make him a scrappy grinder who won because it fits with his personality. He's a scrappy grinder in the classroom too and in life. There's a scene near the end of the book where he's being interviewed for a law firm for a job, and he invokes a tennis metaphor, and he talks about about being a pusher and how this is not a dignified way to win. But he says, I was a but I couldn't be pushed around. I no matter what, I never gave up. And he also says, there's no one I enjoy beating more than the rich kids. And even though the people interviewing him are these patrician, rich, older men, he's sort of he's therefore insulting them. He says, that's who I'll beat for you, the other rich kids. I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I didn't go to a top law school either. I'll beat these rich kids. I just don't give up. The first draft of that scene was very different. He was instead talking about how he's extremely handsome, and that sounds stupid. Connor's supposed to be very handsome in the novel. It's partly why various women throw themselves at him. He had some justification about being very attractive, and it was an advantage in business, and other men respect him because of it, and women are attracted to him because of it. It was a stupid speech and it didn't work out well. And then I thought, yes, let me revise this. Let me connect this back to the tennis metaphor. And that's an example, I think, of how, yes, in the writing, you discover what you're trying to say. I mean, this is the sort of cliche about writers. We don't know. We write to figure out what we're trying to say. And I think I had a general idea about his tennis strategy and some theme of the book and his character, but it required writing it and drilling down to, what does this tennis player think about when he's playing tennis? How does this inform who he is? That's where it comes out in the writing.
Well, and it's also like, I can't help but think of the title of the book, because the winner obviously refers to somebody who wins in life, and to these people at Cutter's Neck who are all, in the American view of things, quote unquote winners. But a winner is also the name of a particular shot in tennis.
Yeah.
Where somebody hits a winner. They take the big swing. They send the ball down the line past the person at the net, and there's risk involved. That is significant.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the mentor says. You don't have to hit a winner to be the winner, and that's really where the title comes from. Also, the girl he starts dating later says, "You look like a winner, the kind of guy who gets everything he wants in life." And Connor, of course, does not think that's the case. He thinks he's had to work very hard for everything he's ever gotten, but he looks the part, at least. And I think the book is about his embodying more and more that idea of being a winner or the winner. Like, but then again, is he? According to his mentor, you don't want to be that top rank, and that's what he starts reaching for by the end. And it's my belief, again, I side with the mentor here. I don't think that's a good perch to be in, a good rank to be in. I think you just get obsessed with power and hang on to it, or whatever that ranking gives you. And people are happier, much happier, when they are okay with sort of having less. But it's a hard thing. Easier said than done, obviously.
Well, it's it's a rarefied world, and it's interesting. It's a little twisted, but it's interesting. You know, these people who live on Cutter's Neck and who are these waspy, like top half of the 1%. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? Like these are really wealthy people who have come by their wealth mostly generationally. It's inherited, as you said. And I want to say that when you were writing the book, you were obviously thinking a lot about class, but you were thinking about a book by Paul Fussell
Yes.
called
Yeah.
Class,
Cult
which
class. Yeah.
in which he sort of like delineates the social classes in America, right? Is it America or
Hmm.
is it?
Yeah, yeah. America. It's a 1983 book, but it's still very relevant today. I recommend it highly. Uh, the big project of the book is outlining the 9 different social classes he sees in America, the 9 strata, from like I think upper middle upper class I think is the top, and like lower class. He's got other things like middle prole or something. He's got different names for them. Um, Beyond the simple upper class, middle class, lower class rubric we're used to. One interesting insight he has is that the richest of the rich, the upper class, and the poorest of the poor, the lowest class, are both somewhat out of sight in society. The poorest of the poor are in prisons and in homeless shelters and on the street. We don't see them. You know, they're sort of invisible by the rest of society. The upper class, these are not the Kardashians or b- baseball players or basketball players who earn their money by peddling their wares on TV. These are the Harlan Crows, like that guy, the Clarence Thomas guy, who we never hear about until that story, who are really operating behind the scenes and are the ones, the real sources of power in America. They're not even the Donald Trumps. I mean, Trump is obviously very powerful, but they're people you never hear about. No one knows what the Walmart heirs look like. You know, if you saw one of them walking the street, you'd never recognize them. You recognize LeBron James in a second, even though he's got probably comparable financial wealth to some of these people. Maybe not the Walmart heirs. And so I thought about the Cutter's Neck people as somewhat in the vein of this upper class, the out of sight rich, who don't flaunt their wealth, who would never be on a reality show about moneyed people somewhere. And part of it's this old money, these old money values of it's crass and gauche to show to show your wealth, to buy fancy new cars. They all to buy McMansions, gaudy new mansions, to buy new furniture when you might have something that's 300 years old and falling apart. That's what they revere much more so is the authentically old world craftsmanship that's maybe cracking and showing its wear and tear over the new fancy stuff that would be again on a Kardashian reality show.
But is also I want to add a caveat because I feel I've been around some of these people and I feel like the car they drive is like the vintage Mercedes that's a little beat up but still
Yeah.
signifies wealth.
Yes.
And it's also like with regard to furniture, this is the sort of thing I would have no idea. Like I just see an old chair, but somebody who knows, who's wealthy, would see like a 17th century French craftsmanship, or you know what I'm saying? They would be able to
Yes.
see it's coded for those who know. And so by having this stuff, it's a way of communicating non-verbally with other rich people that you are in fact rich but not gauche. like
Yes.
it's like you understand how to be rich basically. It's a
Yeah.
way of being
It's not
rich.
how like Trump himself lives, right? With gold everywhere, and he doesn't wear, I don't think, logoed shirts or anything like that. But the truly rich of the rich don't wear like Ralph Lauren shirts with a big polo player on the front. It's kind of gaudy to wear something that signifies here's where I bought it from. You wear things that no one would ever, don't even know the names of. I don't know the names of these places, and signifiers that are tend to be more tactful and communicating from one to another. They also, I think, only consort with their own kind, right? They're not even mingling with us hoi polloi. So they're this is among their own crowd, and they know what. Yes, the slightly beat up vintage Bentley is what they would drive. They wouldn't drive the newfangled. They would never drive an Elon Musk Cybertruck. You know, that's like the height of it. Um, That said, it's changing quite a bit. I think now. I think their offspring is not quite as committed to the old world ways, and I have to think they're being influenced by what we see in America, which is, influencers on Instagram and people on TV who are flashing their wealth, and I feel like that's bled into the waspy culture.
Well, and I think, it's interesting to think about, the pandemic really heightened this effect. But I felt this in college, and I felt it increasingly in my adult life, that financial wealth is plays a very prominent role in how social structures sort themselves out. And you can be friends with somebody, say in college, and
Hmm.
they have a huge inheritance, for example. It's harder to stay friends with that person unless you two become very wealthy. Simply because they're like, what are you up to? You're like, I'm working. And they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to New Zealand for 2 months, or I'm moving my family to Europe because we just want to like experience it and like hike in the Dolomites and, all these different things that people with money can do. It's hard. And I think that it inherently, it's inherently imbalanced, and it can breed
Resentment. I mean,
resentment. And then it
yeah.
also, I think rich people like to congregate together because they don't have to feel bad about their wealth around other rich people. So what ends up happening is that, yeah, they all just hang out together typically, or they often just hang out with other rich people so they can do rich people things without poor people being there to sort of spoil the fun.
I was talking with a friend last night about, I think the same applies to famous people, very famous people, in that they can't hang out with non-famous people because the same thing, the non-famous people want something from them, or are resentful or whatever it is. They can only hang out with people of equal celebrity because, hey, we're all in the same club here. There's no grudges here. But absolutely, the self-sorting mechanism of wealth as you get older, it doesn't matter so much in college or before that. You're still going to go probably to like the diner down the street. But when you're 38, suddenly, no, the rich people want to go to like the Michelin starred restaurant, and you can't necessarily afford that.
Right.
Let alone like just, yeah, how you live your lives. I think real estate becomes the real crux of this, and that's why I thought the house that Catherine lives in is the fanciest house on Cutter's Neck. They're the most expensive one. It's one that her ex-husband built, this kind of gaudy McMansion over his old family estate. He's sort of fallen prey to the new money mentality, even though he's from old money himself. And real estate is where um, these differences really emerge very starkly. In that, when you go to a friend's house and they've clearly their parents like paid for this. I live in Brooklyn. This $3 million brownstone. Obviously, they didn't afford that on their documentary filmmaker income. This is someone else bought this for you, and how can you not be a little bit resentful of that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough thing. And I think like what it makes me think about are the obligations that might or should be incumbent upon those to whom a lot has been given. And it's like, well, what are they? I like to think if I had like some $50 million trust fund that I would just be like doing charity work. Like,
I think
right?
it's what a
Like,
lot. I do think a lot of them do that as a both as a moral imperative and a way to assuage guilt, and as something just to do. Like they don't have to work in a meaningful way, so this is like their work. And I think I've never sat on a board of any type in my life, and I would never do it. It's not doesn't appeal to me. I have to think sitting on a philanthropic board is not that hard to do, is my guess. I think you probably show up to a few meetings a year and vote on the obvious thing of, yes, let's give money to people less well off than we are. But that's why a lot of them, I think, do that, because what else are they going to do with themselves? That's why I think it's a curse also to have that much money. Um, Certainly to grow up with it, I think is really a curse, because it just ruins your idea of what you should become. There's no need to stand on your own 2 feet and become your own person in a professional sense, because you have all the money in the world waiting for you. You would also feel like, what's the point? I'll never surpass my great 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 grandfather who made a killing in 1820s as a shipping magnate, and here I am now, 200 years later. What am I going to do? And so it warps your idea of ambition and purpose, and puts you in this bubble of privilege that you're probably not going to escape from either. And I think it's a really bad way to raise children, let alone when you're an adult. What do you do when you're 50 and you don't really need to work either? And how do you fill your days up? There's this, have you ever seen the movie Born Rich documentary from
I,
15,
I'm
20 years ago?
I'm familiar with it. Wasn't like Paris Hilton in that, or
I
maybe
think Bloomberg's daughter's in it. I
Ivanka's
think
in it.
Ivanka Trump, yeah.
That's right.
A scene that always kind of like haunts me is the father, the probably 50 something father of one of the young men, people. And it's all about young people who are born rich. He's in his library and he says to his son something like, someday you'll find, he's this like kind of classic, I don't want to say, just sort of like washed out, waspy man who's got just, he seems like a ghost. He says, you might find that you'll be into collecting things, like as a hobby, like collecting stamps. I think something like that. And it feels, I was so sad. Like this guy, his life is built around like stamp collecting now because he never decided what he wanted to do with himself. And what a waste of one's life. And yes, he eats well and drinks well and lives well, but you need work is an important part of a full rounded adult life. And if you don't have it at all, if there's nothing, no real passion that is part of your 8 hours a day of work, that's a lot of years to fill with stamp collecting.
What they're like, what, $10,000 stamps, whatever these
Yeah.
rare stamps. But it just seems like so obvious to me that if you are, like there's nothing inherently evil about money. And if you're born into some family that's dynastically wealthy, it's not your fault. Do you know what I'm saying? So like if
Yeah.
you're, I don't know, whoever these people are in this documentary, Ivanka, but she's not really the right example, but just like somebody whose great grandfather was a shipping titan and you have come into all this money, great. Okay. Not your fault. Just live a life of service. Work hard to help other people. Make that your mission. Isn't that the way to handle it? Like without like it just
Some do. I think some of them do. I think some become like teachers and take jobs that are not financially remunerative and more socially meaningful. But I've noticed you rarely from these families find, like, for instance, doctors. It's a pretty rare profession to wind up as if you're from like this kind of very, I'm talking not just upper middle class, you know kind of kids. That makes sense, you'd be a doctor. I'm talking about like, millions and millions of dollars, huge trust funds. And the reason you don't get many doctors, I think, is it's really hard to become a doctor. It takes a lot of work, and you have to be really driven by it and feel like, all right, this is not only a ton of work, but I will be financially compensated for this down the road too. So it all makes sense. It's a meaningful job, plus there's money to it. One of the rare jobs in America, I'd say, where both can be true. You can be doing a service for others and make a lot of money at it. If you don't need that money at all, even if you're probably going to not become a doctor, you're going to become a teacher or something. There's some other job or a social worker, something else that is also meaningful, but not nearly as many years of schooling and as grueling. And you're not going to stay up for 36 hours straight on a hospital shift because that's just too hard. Let me do the slightly easier option. And that is almost, it's a sad thing because being a doctor, I think, is an incredibly meaningful profession. And yes, it's harder, but this is, I don't want to sound like a Hallmark card. Harder things are often worth it in life, and the harder you work, probably you'll get more out of it. And I think there's many other examples besides being a doctor about how one lives that are also worth it. I think it's good in your 20s to have roommates and to live kind of like cheaply and to have to scrounge and figure out how you're paying for your next meal. I just quoted Bob Dylan without meaning to. But I think it's good to sort of live in a scrappy way and become resourceful and not feel like, not feel complete secure economic security. You don't want to feel constantly insecure too. That's no way to live either. Uh, but if you never have to worry about that, that's a part of like humanity that you're not accessing, and you'll never understand what it's like. And this is not to say people who live like that all become, out of touch Republicans. It's not all the case. But you need to have a little understanding of how hard life can be for other people, or else you'll lose that forever and you'll never really develop it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that there are a lot of really well-intentioned people who are like super insensitive. They're good-hearted. You know what I'm saying? These are not like inherently evil people, but I just think that the insulation provided by wealth can disconnect you from even people close to you, like friends of yours. You know, this is what I think it brings us back to this, like this sort of social sorting process that happens where I mean, I've had conversations with friends and they're just like very happily telling me about, like, you know, just for example, during the pandemic, it's like, yeah, we just moved to Jackson Hole to try it out and to like, and I'm sitting here just going, okay, like,
But
wow.
then at the same side, and not to impugn you, but I'll impugn myself too, the people financially below us could say the same thing about us.
That's
Like,
right.
you know, we
No
so
doubt.
there's that. That's what makes, to me, class a very interesting subject in general and for literature. No matter where you are, it's not a binary. There's not just rich and poor. There's a million gradations of class, and that's why I think the Paul Fussell book is instructive. It really shouldn't just be three, a tripartite structure of class. It's at least nine classes, if not dozens and dozens, because no matter where you are, there's someone who is 10% higher and 10% lower who might have different view of how you live, and you to them. Um, Whereas I think with, race is a little bit more of a sort of a literally black and white issue at times, or gender is often more. Of course, there's spectrums of both of these subjects. Class is just a very divisible spectrum, and therefore it's harder to even identify what someone's class is. Of course, you could say right now, I'm looking at both of us, the backgrounds and what we look like. We look like certain type of, white professional class. I think would be very easy to pick apart. But I don't know what your net worth is. You don't know what mine is. You could have a guess maybe, but it's still not easily pinned the way that I can easily say you're clearly a white guy somewhere between 40 and 60. That's just sort of objectively obvious. And look at, things we're wearing. You're wearing a certain kind of hooded sweatshirt right now. It looks like.
That's
I don't
right.
want to turn this. I don't want to turn this on you. I'm wearing a sort of like a heathered T-shirt. These little things give away who we are. My glasses very much give me away who I am too. And so these little very sort of, I don't know, it has subtle signifiers of social class that point to economic class, and they're two different things too, but they're often commensurate. I think are make for fascinating and compelling art.
You strike me. I want to say I might have picked up on this in prep, but I do think certain people have access to a wider spectrum of class experience than others. Like there are some people whose entire social set is entirely on the lowest end of the spectrum,
Mhm.
right? Or one of the lower ends of the Fussell spectrum. There are people like these folks at Cutter's Neck in your book who only consort with other ultra wealthy individuals and live inside that bubble. But there are people in the middle, and maybe you're one of them, who have experience at multiple stations or who have like at least had a vantage, like some sort of direct experience seeing lots of different class experiences, right?
I wouldn't say I'm like the most, there's definitely people and writers who I think have truly experience with all walks of life, much more so than I do. I think it is one of the advantages of living in New York, even in my bourgeois corner of Brooklyn, where I'm, it frequently just looks like, this is Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, but for the upper middle class.
Right.
Even there, you still take a subway and you're gonna see plenty of homeless people, and you still walk to school and you'll see my kid's school, that is, different people of different ethnicities and social classes. I think if I lived in, a suburb in Connecticut, I, I'd be in a car and would be just among my own kind, much more so. So I think there's that advantage. Um, I was saying this to my wife the other day. I feel like so half her family is from this kind of waspy background, half is not. among the half that is, I feel like the previous generation only socialized with their own types, really. Like that's just that was their whole world, was just their friends who looked like that, their cousins. It was like kind of the Kennedy compound type of experience of this is it. And the next generation, my wife's generation, had much more varied experiences. They broke out of that bubble and hung out with different kinds of people in college and beyond. And of course, we're all constrained somewhat by our social parameters, and it's not to say we're all just hanging out with a complete melting pot of people, but it's not quite as insular as that previous generation was. So yeah, again, to repeat, I think there are people who have much more variety than I do, but I think living in New York City just forces that upon you in a way that might not be the case other places.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely true. It's similar in Los Angeles, and I think there are also people who, through family experience or where you grew up, or uh, like how far you've come personally from where you started, will just see more than people who are sort of like born into one extreme or the other. And I'm curious to know about your thoughts on the the causes of success, like this argument around whether or not somebody has quote unquote earned their good fortune versus whether or not luck played a role. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, because I think we get into these like super high income strata, and especially around, among a certain kind of super rich person, there is this idea that like this is mine, and like don't touch it. And I'm curious just to hear your thoughts on that stuff.
I mean, it makes sense, right? That if someone's that wealthy, they want to justify it as I must have done something right to get this, and I'm not a bad person for it, nor did I luck out into it. I think it's pretty obvious to everyone. Donald Trump would not be a billionaire if not for his father being very rich. He does have, I hate to admit it, certain kind of animal instincts that serve him well, probably in business and certainly in politics. But no, obviously it's very hard to make $10 million in America unless you grew up already rich to some degree. If you have that kind of backing to begin with. Um, Beyond that, though, like I said before, I do think if you had too much of it, um, it stymies your ambition and makes you more softer and less resilient, and you probably won't actually pursue it. So it doesn't shock me that the richest self-made people in America are upper middle class suburban white guys. Mark Zuckerberg, you know, who else would fall into that? Who are under 50, or let's
Uh,
just say Bill Gates. Let's just say he's older, of course, but same kind of thing, right? Very bright, high achieving members of
I mean,
the upper middle
Steve
class.
Jobs fell into that
Yes,
too. I mean, he didn't come
yeah.
from. He was an adopted. I think one of his dad was like or his adopted father was like a plumber or something. It was like working class.
So and probably a little bit easier back in that day than it would be in the last 30 years to make it, but because the better education systems and things like that. But Mark Zuckerberg, I think, would be a prime example. Father's a dentist in Dobbs Ferry, a suburb in New York. Went to, I'm sure, a very good Dobbs Ferry High School, as I'm guessing. Went to Harvard, bright, ambitious, high achieving, but not given so much money that he didn't feel the need to conquer the world, and so he did conquer it because that's the kind of achievement oriented environment he was raised in, where he'd also had enough advantages to do so. And so I would think he probably thinks it's justified that yes, he had some advantages, but he's also preternaturally gifted and hardworking. Both things are probably true. I think he's preternaturally gifted, hardworking, but a lot of people are, and they don't always have the advantages of being able to go to a very good public high school and a very good college that paid for by your parents and can capitalize on that. And so I don't know Mark Zuckerberg personally. Maybe he's a little bit more enlightened about it, but you really need those two things in concert. You need whatever personal skills you have, and you need almost always someone else backing you up along the way, or else you can't do it.
I feel like I'm on board with, like, I don't have anything against people doing well. Like, and especially if you like risk the most, like you're the entrepreneur who started the business and either put their own capital into it or raise money somehow and could have lost it all, but didn't, made the thing work. And it turned out to be a really successful business. Like, okay, like I'm a fan of that. Like, that's great. We have to have businesses and we have to have people creating things, right? I mean, I don't see how the world works in the absence of that. But Mark Zuckerberg's wealth, like I don't even know what it's at right now, but it's like what, $100 billion? I have no
Who
idea,
knows? Yeah.
but a huge number, like an absolutely astronomical number that exceeds the what do you call it, the GDP of like many small countries. You know,
Hmm.
it's an absurd amount of money for a single individual to have. I often will say to myself, like, okay, I don't hold it against anybody for being wealthy, but at a certain point, Jeff Bezos, for however much he risked and however much sweat equity he put into Amazon, he has built that business on the backs of so many people who helped him. And yes, he compensated them, but also there are these warehouse workers who are like peeing in bags and, you know, are held to these like brutal productivity standards that are like bad for their physical and mental health. And it's a brutal labor that goes into it. And these people are not compensated well. They probably don't get equity, I'm imagining, in the company. Isn't there, shouldn't there be a limit on how much a person, how much wealth a single human being should be able to hold on to? Doesn't it become immoral at a certain point for somebody to have $100 billion while there are people sleeping in the streets?
No.
I mean, that would be
Yeah.
an interesting argument. I'm
Yeah.
open to it. I mean, I think
There's
there are people who believe that there's
you
nothing
should
wrong with
invite
it.
someone on your show who would disagree with that. Obviously, I agree with you. One of the a townie, I don't know if that word is not appropriate to use anymore, but a working class guy from town that Connor meets early in the book, when he comes to Cutters, says, "You don't get this rich. No one gets this rich just by working hard and playing by the rules. Someone in their family did something illegal or almost illegal back in the day to get this much money." So yes, Jeff Bezos has probably done nothing illegal, right? Although there have probably been some lawsuits against him that would suggest otherwise. But you could say yes, making people urinate in bags while they're working 14-hour shifts is barely legal or should be illegal, and that's how you get there. And the same for anyone making that much money squashed other competitors or did something kind of nasty to other people, or simply just, it's I don't view it, I view it as a zero sum game still. I know capitalism likes to think of itself as not that someone making money can still contribute to other people making money too, and no one's going to be a loser here. I Yes, maybe in some economic accounting of it that's technically the case. I still view it as there are winners and losers in this, and even if the losers do better because they're of certain winners, there's some trickle down effect. You still always have a winner and a loser in any kind of transaction. Someone who's not getting doing as well as the other person. Often the case is they're doing much worse because the other person is benefiting, and that's just how it works, in my view at least. And again, I'm sure some right wing economists would tell me, no, you're wrong. When Jeff Bezos does this, he gives jobs to hundreds of thousands of other people. They're all going, yes, but we would have had, hundreds of thousands of other small stores, neighborhood stores still existing if not for him too, and people would not be urinating in bags on their shifts. And yes, maybe there's less pumped into the economy from that, possibly overall, and that at the Amazon, as an example, has been a net positive for our economic well-being. But with that net positive comes a lot of human cost, if not financial cost, to other people.
No doubt. No doubt. Well, these are all interesting questions that your book raises, either explicitly or implicitly. And it's just a joy to read it. If anyone out there is looking for, like, I mean, I hate to reduce it, but it's like it's a good summer book, right? You're on your summer vacation.
It's
you want
a
to
beach read, yeah.
I mean, but it's a book that, like, if you're on vacation and you want to have a great escape and to have a book that like lingers in your mind and that you want to go back to, and that has, in addition to being beautifully plotted and really stimulating in that way, also like real measures of depth. And it's a book that has a lot on its mind in a smart way. This is it. It's the total package. And I loved it. And it's always fun to talk with you. I always ask at the end if there's anything else in the works. You're definitely one of those writers who's always got an iron in the fire, or like multiple irons, but you've got screenplay stuff going on. You're working on another book. Like, what's happening behind the scenes?
Other screenplay stuff, adapting some of my own things and starting to adapt other people's work too.
I read that you were adapting Andrew Lipstein's, or one of his
Yeah,
books.
yeah. Last Resort, his first book, came out a couple years ago. Yeah, I am. Hopefully, something will happen to that too. It's for a production company. I mean, I've enjoyed that. Enjoyed that a lot. Adapting someone else's book as opposed to my own. It is easier to sort of see how you really don't have to be precious about it when it's not your own book.
Yeah. It's much easier to destroy the source
Yeah,
material.
yeah, exactly. I can just kill it without any kind of compunction. But it's funny because with my own books, I would probably look very carefully at the dialogue I wrote in the book itself and look, all right, let me use this for this scene. With his book, I noticed myself not referring back to the book that often, just knowing what the scene was and then writing it from whole cloth in a way that I might not have done, I think, with my own work. And I hope it's for the better, and that there was, by not so slavishly following it because I was the author, maybe I was able to adapt it more seamlessly for this new medium.
Well, interesting. And then you have another book in the works, did you say, or no?
I've been working on a middle grade novel, my first one ever, that I don't know if I'll really pursue publication with it. I don't know if it's any good, but I worked on it this spring and still thinking about it.
What is a middle grade? What does that even mean? That's like for
Yeah, I had to learn all this too. 10 to 12-year-olds. It's very, very sort of, they have a young adult world and kids literature world. It really has these micro categories of like 5 to 7, 8 to 10. 10 to 12-year-olds is what I think it's written for. And so that's middle grade, or I think it's maybe called early middle grade. I can't remember.
Okay. Well, we'll stay tuned for it. It's good to see you and to talk with you. I appreciate the time, and I wish you all the best with all that you have going.
Thanks so much, Brad.
All right, folks, there we go. That was Teddy Wayne. Great conversation. His new novel is called The Winner, and it is available from Harper. You can find Teddy on the internet at teddywayne.com. Follow him on Twitter. One more time, his new novel is called The Winner. It is riveting. You'll read it in one sitting. 2 tops. Go get your copy right away. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Bluesky. Sign up for my newsletter at bradlisti.substack.com. Join the Other People Patreon at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep this show going into the future. And if you want to give this show a rating and write a little review wherever you listen, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, wherever you listen, rate it, review it. It helps the show find new listeners. To get a Other People t-shirt or to sign up for my book club, visit the show's official website, otherppl.com. And if you would like to read my latest book, it is a novel called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. Got to give it a plug. It is out there now in trade paperback, ebook, and audiobook editions. I narrate the audiobook, so I'll read it to you if you want. It is a novel. It's my novel. It's called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. And you can read it. All right, so another big week ahead on the Other People show. Coming up tomorrow, Monday, there will be a new monologue. And then on Tuesday, a new episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, in which I will be joined by Mira Gonzalez. And then on Wednesday, my guest will be Ayanna Mathis, author of the novel The Unsettled, which is out there now in trade paperback. So A lot of good stuff in the pipeline. It is coming your way. Stay tuned.